the Quatermass Experiment, 1955. Is this the earliest Hammer film that we've talked about? I mean, we've already done Hammerland. Now we're talking about Son of Hammerland. So these are the Hammer films that are not related to Dracula and Frankenstein. We're really going off script here, talking about science, good old-fashioned science fiction. 1955, it's a black and white Hammer film. Is this the earliest we've gone back, sir?
It is the earliest. Curse of Frankenstein is 1957. And this was 2 years earlier. It is ostensibly the first Hammer horror. However, there was the Mystery of the Mary Celeste, which is, I think, back in the 40s. And that actually featured Bela Lugosi. It's not technically a horror film, but it is a spooky, atmospheric thriller. But yes, as far as our venturing into Hammerland, this is the earliest we have gone, and in some ways, this is kind of the birth of Hammer horror. And there's a strong argument to be made that there would not have been a Hammer horror had it not been for the success of Quatermass Experiment.
We're going to have this conversation again. Is this a horror movie?
Well, yeah, I think it. Do you think it's not a horror movie? There's a guy mutating into a creature. I mean, if you're going to call most science fiction horror, I mean, I feel like it falls squarely into the horror realm, and both in terms of what we see on screen and as well as kind of the intellectual aspect of it. Well, we can dig deeper into it, but yes, I would technically call this horror because I like to mash up sci-fi and horror anyway. If it's got a monster, if there's terrifying things happening in space, I'm all for it.
Fair enough. Sometimes I struggle with these movies. I totally see your point. And, I can not very much prodding be brought over to the side of, yeah, it's a horror film. It's a sci-fi horror film. But to me, it's more of a G-Men walking through doors urgently movie. There's if you bundle up all of the monster action in this, the movie's an hour and 18 minutes long. There's probably an hour of people talking about this thing that's been unleashed on the earth. Not that I don't really love this movie. It's just a really odd film. And, I think possibly very influential. They use the phrase, make the earth stand still. And even the space, I'm jumping all around here, but when they get into the spacecraft that crash lands, the astronauts are wearing these very Gort-like helmets on their heads. So yeah, it's a fascinating movie, and I can't wait to talk to you about it. I understand you're pretty high on this film. Tell me about the first time you saw the Quatermass Experiment and
Quatermass.
Yeah,
Quatermass.
Yes, I always thought it was Quatermass or
Quartermass, Quartermaster.
Not Quatermass. That sounds like sailing the high seas or something. It's a Quartermaster. Ye Hardies. But so where was this in terms of your Hammer education, or indeed your sci-fi or sci-fi horror education?
Well, similar to you, actually. I went through the Hammer Gothic series first, and then kind of circled back around to Quatermass. And this was actually, I think, the second of the Quatermass movies that I saw. I saw Quatermass in the Pit, which is also known as 5 Million Years to Earth. I saw that one first, and that's from 1967, and then eventually made my way back to this one. This film is actually hugely influential, both in terms of the subject matter and the its place in launching Hammer films. It was based on a hugely successful 6-episode BBC miniseries that was written by Nigel Neal. And then the director, Val Guest, and an American screenwriter, Richard Landau, who also did Frankenstein 1970, starring Boris Karloff. They had the incredible job of condensing a 6-episode miniseries down into an 82-minute film. And what I really like, I mean, I really like how this movie. Well, you may disagree since there's a lot of going in and out of doors, but I feel like this movie really moves. I feel like it has a lot of energy, and the plot. It touches on some really interesting plot points that it maybe not explore to the fullest. But I love how it kind of they just kind of drop it in there, and you're like, oh, that's also a thing. It's kind of one of those things you can discuss afterwards, such as we're doing now.
So, have you ever gone back and watched the British miniseries?
I have never seen the full miniseries, but I've read enough that I kind of know what the main differences in it are.
And were any of the people involved in the film involved in that? Did they carry over, like, Brian Dunleavy as Professor
Nope.
Bernard Quatermass?
Nope. If you say Quatermass again, though, you're going to get in big trouble.
Dr. Q. I'll just call him Dr. Q.
Just call him Dr. Q. So no, there were actually Nigel Neal was not even approached to adapt his own script. He would adapt Quatermass 2. But for this one, he was not even asked. And as a result, he didn't receive any royalties for the film either. The BBC decided they owned it and they had the rights to sell it, which made Nigel Neal none too happy. But Nigel Neal apparently wasn't none too happy about a lot of things, particularly the casting of Brian Donlevy in the role of Quatermass. He found Quatermass to be too belligerent and too, just gruff and unlikable. Apparently, in the BBC miniseries, he's a little more accessible. He's a little more thoughtful. He's a little more benevolent. But what I love about what Donlevy brings to the character is that it is that single-mindedness. It is that I don't really care about the fallout. I care about what the experiment actually proves. Like he talks about how, hey, I sent that spaceship up and I brought it back. Bingo, end of story, success. Yes, our two astronauts may have been turned into jelly, and this other guy, may have his own problems. But you know what? I'm counting it as a win.
And that's when you say that the original conception of Quatermass was a little bit more accessible. Was the story, the kind of the broad outlines of his character still the same? Because I can't imagine the character from this movie being anything but the kind of cold, calculating, I'm going to get my alien, or get my man kind of a guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a perfect performance. And was he an American in the original version?
No, he was British. That was another, beef that Nigel Neal had. Donlevy was brought on board because they did that wasn't a full co-production, but Robert Lippard was an American producer, and they teamed with him. And part of the deal with the American money was that they wanted to have an American star as well. And Donlevy, while he wasn't, riding as high, he had been Oscar nominated at one point. He'd had some strong career moves in the 40s. And so, he was a recognizable name. What's interesting is that now he's best known as Professor Quatermass, as opposed to Beau Jess or Glass Key, some of the other films that made him a name in the first place.
Well, I love the fact that he's an American scientist, government guy. It just brings us almost an undercurrent of like this brush bull in a china shop going over and telling all these like stiff, Brits like, what's up? Even though they're, they've got their own kind of way of doing things, is like, no.
Right.
It's also a bit jarring because when we first see him, I think he's in the car with the other group of people going out to the site of this crashed rocket in this kind of British hillside farm. And everyone's talking, and then he opens his mouth. I'm like, wait, why is Robert Forster in this movie? He's got a very distinct voice.
Well, and I think that's right. I think that he should be an alien to the environment. Like he is somebody who is not, he is not of the people. He's the one there driving this new thing. It is the Quatermass Experiment, and his name is all over it. It's like he's owning this. And I love that. There's kind of that ugly American quality to it of the, I'm not a team player here. This is the Quatermass Experiment. Nobody else really.
Well, and I do like it. This kind of ties into the ending, which again, folks, if you haven't seen the Quatermass Experiment, go out and watch it for sure. I confess to having watched it on YouTube because there's a really nice transfer of it and it's right there. But I'm sure if there's a Blu-ray or something, I mean, you probably own the Blu-ray, don't you, Aaron?
There is a Blu-ray of it. It's Kino Lorber put it out.
Nice. Is it a double feature with the sequel at all?
It is not actually. Quatermass 2 and Quatermass in the Pit were both put out by Shout Factory in the last couple of years.
Okay.
Not sure why they didn't have the rights to the first one, but these are complicated things.
It was probably just an experiment in licensing. but no, this character, it's got one of the most chilling endings, I think, of any film, which is they've burnt down Westminster Abbey, essentially trying to kill this alien spore. And then everybody's like running out of the place. I like that our chief inspector, he's just kind of like gruffly walking, kind of, he's very, very proper, I'm going to exit with dignity. But then you see Quatermass leaving the scene of the destruction, and this guy catches up to him and he says, what does he say? Something like, where are you going? And it's like, we got to start again. And he just walks off into the shadows, and the last shot of the movie is just another rocket in the middle of the night going up into the stars to face other unknown horrors. It reminded me of a bit of Aliens, the Paul Reiser's Carter Burt character. You wonder, and this is something that was a puzzlement to me throughout the film, because they don't really handhold you with who Quatermass is. He's involved in an experiment, as you mentioned, his name's all over it. But Judith, who's the wife of Karun, who's the one surviving member of this crashed rocket, who ends up on the lam as a vegetable alien kind of mutant, she is really pissed off at Quatermass. She's constantly giving him crap about his experiment and like what he's trying to do and his ideas. But you get the feeling that there is like a whole other movie that took place. And like, what is your, like, why do you know so much about this guy and what's your beef with him?
Well, I mean, her husband, is part of the crew. So I'm sure that Karun did have, did tell her something about, his day at the office with Professor Quatermass. But also just, I think it kind of points to the fact that he's not touchy-feely at all. He's very much, he's not interested necessarily in the welfare of her husband. He's interested in the answers that her husband has. And those are very clear and distinct things that, like the film makes clear.
I was also reminded of, and I don't mean to keep bringing up these other movies, except to say that I'm watching this movie and I'm thinking about all the other places that I've seen these kind of ideas and these visual cues, and I'm wondering how influential this really was. Because to me, it seems like, okay, the people who made Event Horizon had to have been big Quatermass fans. The ship goes out into the stars, it ends up kind of lost and then returning, and it brings something back that no one can understand, and it has to be destroyed. There's also a wonderful moment where they recover the ship's camera. And, and there's a group of scientists watching the silent footage of what happened during the alien encounter. And we don't see a whole lot. There's some really cool squibbly, distortion effects, which look really good. But there's a bit where one of the astronauts actually pulls a 2001 and walks up the circular wall.
Yeah,
like,
right.
You're kidding me. This is, 14 years before 2001.
Yeah, no, it's again, I think it is influential. It was a huge hit. The original miniseries, they actually started closing the pubs on whatever night it played because nobody was there. Everybody was home watching Quatermass. And when they did the big screen, it's actually a good time to kind of talk about. It's spelled experiment, so it's misspelled. And the reason for that was that they knew they were going to receive a X rating, which meant adults only. Doesn't mean X like it means now. It just meant that the X rating meant that it was adults only. And so most films did not want the dreaded X rating because it meant it was going to cut into their profits. But Hammer decided they were going to kind of embrace it and actually point it up by leaving the E off and making it's super. This is X. This is going to be, and the idea was that it was going to be an even more intense, explicit version of that story that you saw on television. This is going to be the big screen X version of it, and it worked. It worked great. There were cues around the block, and actually their next film they did was called X the Unknown, and they decided they were just going to play that card twice, and X the Unknown was actually a pretty good hit too as well. So then they stopped doing that and they called it Quatermass 2.
So I want to jump ahead real quick because you said something that I think I had seen in my pathetic research, but I had forgotten about. 1967 is when Quatermass and the Pit came out. I should have to take a shot every time I screw that up. I don't know if that'd make it better or worse, but was it a real sequel to this film? And did they bring out back the original people involved in it?
That's a great point. No, they did not. It's almost completely unrelated. It's the same character, but he is exploring. They're doing some digging for the London Underground, and they stumble across what appears to be a spaceship. And then things go from there, which is why they call Quatermass in, because he's that space guy.
Well, but it's not connected to this film. Like the spaceship they find isn't like.
Well, Quatermass 2 isn't technically connected to this film either. It's a separate story of Quatermass. So, and Andrew Keir, who you may remember as Father Sandor in Dracula, Prince of Darkness, he plays our Bernard Quatermass there.
Nice. That's part of the problem is I know we've got a schedule for these movies coming up, and I just want to go and watch them all now when we get to talking about things. But yeah, one thing that struck me was, and I am not as up on my 1950s sci-fi horror movies as I probably should be, or at least I've seen a handful of them, but not enough to connect the dots and find themes and notice patterns. But the makeup effects in this film were pretty exceptional. Not necessarily the giant weird cactus arm, although that reminded me a bit of The Fly with the cactus tines.
Yeah, yep.
But the scene where they are examining Karun, I think for the first time, and he's described as having really icy skin, and they pull back his shirt and you see the veins, even though it's in black and white. I swear to God, this was like high definition modern color effects. It was so convincing looking.
Yeah, I really like that. I like Phil Leakey is the makeup man behind this, and he would later go on to turn Christopher Lee into the Frankenstein monster for Curse of Frankenstein. And Phil Leakey was kind of the resident makeup man for Hammer until Roy Asher took over.
Yeah, it's I wasn't too crazy about some of those in-between phases of the monster where it just looked like, I mean, at one point when the tendrils attack the mice or attempt to, it looked like a giant something or other, a phallus.
Yeah. I can't say that I love the. I'm not as impressed by the final version of the Karun monster. In Westminster Abbey, I think it looks every bit like the pieces of tripe being manipulated by wires and strings that it actually is. However, it's also worth pointing out that Les Bowie, who did the special effects, the Westminster Abbey it's a set. Like that is all matte paintings, and it's actually on a set in and it looks incredible. It looks very much like you're shooting inside Westminster Abbey. But apparently they approached Westminster Abbey and said, "Hey, can we shoot this monster movie in your church?" And they said, "No."
Probably rightfully so. I did like the monster, except for I like the head. If you can determine that it has a head, it's got like that giant kind of like.
Yes, I like that close up
eye. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But whenever it gets down to the tendrils and the spores that are got to get loose, and like, yeah, that just looks like it looks like condoms with latex, applied to the outside.
Yep.
I can't fault it for that. There was also, a bit of Frankenstein in this. That Karun what's interesting about this, we don't get into the psychology of the alien. We get the idea that it has enough intelligence to kind of play it cool and strategize about the best way to get out into the world and kind of spread its spores. But in the scene where Karun, he's broken out of this, military hospital or whatever, and he's wandering the land. He wakes up in a boat that he's kind of taken shelter in. And there's this little girl who wants to play dolls with him, or doll tea party. It's not, we up until that point, you'd kind of gotten the impression that Karun as a person was gone, and it was just the monster was wearing him as a suit. But there's a real struggle with him to like not touch that girl because he kind of knows what's going to happen. I don't know if that's the alien recognizing this is like an innocent young life, although if the idea is to devour the planet, what difference does that make? Or if there's something of the man still trapped inside there. What's your interpretation? I
get the sense, like you, that there is a battle going on. You get that weird, like when just to circle back around, just before, because it's his wife that actually conspires to break him out of the hospital, and she hires a private detective to do so. And as the detective gets Karun ready to leave, he leaves the room for a second to kind of check if the coast is clear, leaving Karun alone with his cactus that is in the room with him. And you see him kind of like raising his hand, and I get that that's Karun recognizing, what are you about to do, alien, with my body? And then it smashes it into the cactus. Because, I mean, Karun knows that a cactus is not a good thing to smash your fist into, but the alien doesn't. And I get the sense that the alien is looking to kind of, it's looking to expand, because as we learn, it has the capability of kind of, this is very kind of like the Thing. It has the ability to kind of absorb whatever it comes in contact or ingests. And so he becomes kind of plant, he's growing a plant on his arm at one point. Now, there's another interesting thing, and I hadn't thought about this until I was doing my own feeble research. And the two other astronauts who disappear, Reichenheim and I think Green, they talk about after Karun breaks into the chemist shop, kills the pharmacist, and mixes up this brew and then leaves. They talk about the fact that what he had mixed up was poisonous. Mm-hmm. And what we think is that Karun was trying to kill himself. But they also talk about how Karun actually doesn't know anything about chemistry. It was actually Reichenheim who was the chemist. So you get the sense that maybe he's already absorbed some of Reichenheim as well. And so he's got Reichenheim's knowledge of chemistry. And I don't know if that was further explored in the miniseries or something, because I remember reading that was part of the deal, though, that's why Karun had gone to the chemist shop so that he could mix up this poison and kill himself. But the alien apparently just took it and ran.
That's fascinating. I hadn't really considered that, because I think one of the many scenes in which the GIs and the scientists are standing around like speculating about things, they say that when it got into the ship, it got into the air and killed the other two, and then it went into Karun's body. I don't know if they had thought about it taking the material from the identity of those other two and getting into Karun's body. That's a fascinating idea.
Well, the idea is also, and then I found that this hadn't resonated for me before. If it had, I'd forgotten. But the idea that like the jelly that they find in the engine has human DNA in it, and it's like, ooh, that's them. That's Reichenheim and Green. That's not good. So it's like the alien has already kind of it's centralized in Karun, but there's bits and pieces of it everywhere, and that's what they're concerned about. I think. It's like the blob, right? If you blow up the blob, it doesn't do anything except for spread it out. And so that's why they can't blow up Westminster Abbey. They have to burn it or electrocute it, as they do in this case.
Now, I don't mean to go picking holes in a sci-fi classic.
Please.
I noticed that nobody in this movie wears gloves. There's the one guy who's got that great like folding out grabber thing that he uses to pick up evidence.
Dr. Briscoe.
Yes, which I want one of those, by the way, just to carry around with me because they're awesome.
I can get you one.
All right, I'm going to hold you to that.
Yeah.
My prize will be if I can get through the rest of the show without mispronouncing Quatermass. But
good luck.
Thanks. I just jinxed myself. But no, it's just the idea that when they find like the chemist's body, and his body has been, he's dead, obviously, but there's effects of this alien having touched him. They're just straight up like, the one guy lifts up his hand and like, yep, he's dead. Like, how transmissible is this goo? Because the idea, I don't know if you have to like smash, like it has to make a cut to get into your body, but what I'm getting is you just touch the stuff and it's active on you, but no one seems to care or be affected by it unless it's an actual victim of the monster.
Right. Well, I mean, I think I got the sense that the monster had to kind of like ingest you or bring you bring you in at some point. I don't know, like that, because like when it takes on the animals at the zoo, again, the thing, like when it absorbs the animals, I mean, basically the idea of, like whatever leaves the zoo is not what showed up, you've got like, lions and I forget what other animals it absorbed.
Wasn't it like a leopard or something? Well, they find, I think, the leopard, if that the spotted animal,
right.
That's what the first one they find it. But, and this is, I've never seen The Thing from Another World, which was what, John Carpenter based his, 82 classic remake on. But I do remember from the John Carpenter version, there's a whole deal about the thing. First of all, there's in Quatermass Experiment, there's the scene with the mice where they have those in the glass cage with the little goo, and they're kind of huddled in the corner. I immediately thought of the dogs from Carpenter's Thing. Yep. But in that film, it just takes the little bit amount that's in the petri dish that can turn into a giant like shooting thing and attack people. So I'm wondering, that was kind of my thought. I get what you're saying about having to absorb people, but my question is how much or how little material can there be in order to start the absorption?
Well, I mean, he just gets a little bit of the cactus, and that starts, mutating. So, and also John Carpenter, just for the record, is a huge Nigel Neal fan. So I have no doubt that he was influenced by Quatermass. He's gone on record as saying he really, really likes these films.
And, that's what I would like to see more of in movies today, because, The Thing, if let's just say that Carpenter took a lot from Quatermass Experiment and Thing from Another World, again, a movie I haven't seen, so I don't know how they line up at all. Let's just say that The Thing from Another World didn't have any kind of a scene with like caged animals being in there with this creature. If he saw that movie and then he saw Quatermass, he's like, I'm going to put these together and make something new for an entirely new generation. And Rob Bottin is going to blow everybody's mind. And even the effects in here, like when the thing, sorry, the alien, I guess they're both aliens, breaks out of the glass case, it's impactful, because it's not like, usually you see like wire cages or something like that, especially with mice, but this is a glass case and it slams through. Like, how strong is this thing? It just makes you wonder.
Going back to the you talked about the in-flight camera footage. That was something I really enjoy because, just thinking about, like you talk about things that kind of influence. I don't say that this is the first time this ever happened, but it's like we get a little bit of a blackout and then we come back, and it's like that we see that happen time and time again now in modern horror films where, like something will be coming toward the camera, we'll black out and we're like, oh God, how close is it going to be when the lights come back on? And the same thing kind of happens in the spaceship. We hit the cosmic rays, hit the ship, and then we get this blackout or like, a fault in the film, and then it comes back. But there's a little blackout, there's a little dead space beforehand. And you kind of, I remember he kind of cuts to the scientists watching, because they're also like going, oh geez, what are we going to see when it comes back? I really, there's a lot about this film that I dig. You mentioned the Frankenstein reference in the miniseries. the Karun character is not mute. He actually has dialogue.
Mm.
And I really like the fact that it becomes, like Richard Wordsworth plays Karun. And I think there are many great performances, and I think his is among the best because it's mute. So it's only his face and his body that are doing the emoting, and that struggle between, like we talk about him meeting the little girl, just like in Frankenstein. But where you see that struggle going on, where he's like, I want to get you, I am not going to get you, and him like, frightening her away and like tearing her doll so that he can, get away. It's just a really, really powerful sequence, and I feel like his performance is so strong. There's that scene where he's sitting with his wife in the car after she's broken him out of the hospital, and I forget where I read this, but it's like. Whoever I was reading, they said for that moment, Karun is absolutely gone, and you're just seeing the alien looking at this person and going, huh, what do I do with that, I wonder?
Well, and he tears out of the car, because at first I wasn't sure what had happened. I don't know if he attacked her or whatever, and then later, the cops say that, oh, they found her in her car, and like, they found her in her car. And she was alive, and saying, "Oh, my husband left." I do also want to talk a bit about something that we kind of glossed over. This weird subplot of her hiring a PI to break into the hospital.
Right.
And then there's the old homeless lady.
Oh my gosh, Rosie.
Who she has one of the great lines. Because she's talking about this alien she saw, and the cops believe her, and they're like radioing headquarters, and she says, "You mean this time it's not a gin goblin?" Like, a gin goblin?
Yep.
That's amazing.
I love everything that comes out of Rosie's mouth. It's and she has like one of the best exit lines, because he calls it in, like says, and she like goes, "Oh, me legs," and like just passes out of frame. And I was like, oh, I love you, Rosie. Yeah. Well, that actress, Thora Hind. Hang on one second. I've got it right here. Thora Hird. She got fourth billing, behind Don Levy and our actress Brigida Dean, and yeah. So clearly she was a big deal in England. Jack Warner as Lomax, the inspector, who I also adore. I think he's so lovely and laconic, and just has those lovely moments of light comedy. You talk about great lines. I love when his wife asks him if he's going to be home for dinner, and he's like, "Cook and cross your fingers."
I also like that he's what does he say? Something like, "I'm a plain, simple Bible man."
Yes. Yeah. Well, and he talks about, like, he's like, "I really wish you'd sit down, because if I sit down and you stand, then I'm being rude, and I really, really want to sit." Jack Warner, fun fact, the same year that Quatermass came out, he began this epic 432 episode run of this TV show called Dixon of Dock Green. It ran for 2 decades. It ran from 1955 to 1976.
Wow.
So yeah, this guy, like, he had he had a great great film career going, and then he did this TV show, and suddenly that's who he was. He was Dixon of Dock Green for the rest of his career.
How did he feel about that?
I don't know. I mean, he was a working actor, so I don't know that he was too sad about it.
Well, I just wonder, because sometimes you hear about people getting like pigeonholed, like the golden handcuffs. Like, yeah, this is a great career. It's paying me a lot of money, but now people just know me as that one thing.
Well, I think that you get bitter if your show's canceled, and you can't get, like, if you're Adam West, and you're like, "I did 2 or 3 seasons and now I can't get a job." This guy was working for 21 years. I think he's okay.
Yeah. Or at least he was. I assume he's no longer with us.
You could be right.
One thing is, speaking of dialogue, because I don't want to get back to this PI real quick, but there is a scene where, again, the people are all standing around a room talking about what this alien could be. and I swear they are talking out what the kind of advertising on the poster is going to be. It's a unity between plant and animal with the ability to destroy and possess and multiply at will. That's like one sentence, and it's staggered. I think like two people say it, they kind of complete it, but it's got those same ellipses and pronunciation.
Well, I think what's also great is like that scene you're alluding to is where they're looking at something off screen. It's like they're looking down at it and they're like, oh, it's horrible. It's just, oh, it's terrible. And it's like, you're not even going to show us, are you? You sneaky Hammer folk. I love that. It was like all good theater of the mind, quality stuff.
Yeah. And well, speaking of theatrics, this PI who goes into the hospital, what I loved, two things I loved, his performance. He's just such a cool character that you don't really think of him as a dead meat, but he ends up, as a dead meat. You're almost like, oh, is he going to be part of this crusade that's going to take down the alien? No, he's just in it for one scene, literally.
Right.
But I just love the way he goes in and he kind of cons the other orderly who's watching over Quatermass so that he can, not Quatermass, Karun, so he can help sneak him out. The other thing I loved is that the orderly, when he leaves, he's relieved, he goes out in the hallway, starts it's like he forgot his keys, or like he was going to go back into the room, right, thinking, oh no, the PI has already started to move Karun, he's in trouble. But then these two cute nurses walk by and he's like and turns around and starts hitting him up. But I don't know if this is a flub, but I'm pretty sure when the PI goes into the hospital to do his work, the clock on the wall said like 12:40 in the morning.
Oh,
when he's hitting on the nurses, he's like, so when do you get off? You want to go get some Chinese? And she's like, I get off at 12. He's like, I know a Chinese place that's open late or something like that. I don't know. Either I can't read an old clock correctly, or there was a flub.
All right. Yeah, exactly. I would say probably the latter. Although, these night orderlies, they keep odd hours. So
that's true. He would have been waiting around till 12 noon the next day. Be like, I thought we had a date.
I do want to mention, just because after I was hating on our lovely, Madeline Smith in Vampire Lovers, that I'm going to once again beat up on our female lead here, because Margia Dean is pretty lackluster. She's probably the weak link in the cast for me. She was a former Miss California. And she happened to be, depending on what you read, she was either the girlfriend of Robert Lippert, the producer, or she was the girlfriend of the 20th Century Fox president, Spyro Skouras. In either case, there was a directive from on high that she be cast. And now we know how she got the job.
This is Judith, right?
Yep.
I'm glad you said it, because I hate to say it, but she had somebody's girlfriend written all over her. She bursts into the scenes and she's just so obnoxious and out of place.
Yeah.
And I hate to use the term hysterical because that's got certain connotations, but I'm like, there is a much lower key but still upset version of this character that belongs in this movie.
Well, we get because she's American as well, it makes you kind of wonder, well, gosh, is Karun supposed to be American? We never get to hear him speak, so we don't know. But yes, whereas Quatermass's being American really fits the story. She I don't know if she's dubbed by somebody else or what, but like every time she opens her mouth, it's just like, and I don't
the sound. Yeah.
It was something about the sound. Just sounded, it either sounded wrong or it sounded wrong. But either way, it wasn't helping. And I think she's a pretty face, and I think she screams nicely in the car. But outside of that, I could have done with almost anybody else.
You just gave Ted Bundy's description of every one of his dates.
No,
anyway,
that's horrible.
It really is. But no, I do want to mention there is one. She is involved, this actress, in one of my favorite scenes from the movie, because I don't know if this was intentional or if I just wanted it to be true. But there is a scene where they're in, I think maybe it was the first hospital. Karun's is in a soundproof room, like a hospital bed, and she's sitting with him
right
kind of across the room. and the I think it's Quatermass or maybe the inspector or one of the doctors is in the other room, and we can see through these doors, which turn out to be soundproof doors. They're having a conversation, and between them we can see Judith either sleeping or reading a magazine, and then Karun starts to get up and she doesn't notice, and it's all soundproof. There's no sound coming through. But then when she realizes what's going on, she scrambles for the door, and when she opens the door, she brings the sound, like the score. It's like there was a score of tension and terror playing on the other side
Like
of that door.
building
When
up
she
and-
opens it up, it's like everything's coming through.
Yeah, no, that is, I had actually forgotten about that scene. That's a great one. And what was I just going to say though? This was just something kind of fun fact is that like a lot of the characters, or not characters, but like a lot of the people who we would later come to recognize as kind of being the names behind Hammer, several of them are already in place here. I already mentioned Phil Leakey, but James Bernard, who did the memorable Frankenstein and Dracula themes, and conductor John Hollingsworth, they're both on hand here. And Anthony Hines, I had completely forgotten about this the whole time we were talking about Dracula and Frankenstein last year. Anthony Hines is actually the son of Will Hammer Hines, who the studio was named after. Will Hines, aka Will Hammer, was the founder of Hammer Films, and he and Enrique Carreras, who James Carreras is the son of, they were the ones who formed Hammer Films. And the reason why you see that Exclusive presents as opposed to Hammer Films, I don't know if you noticed that.
I didn't pick up on it.
Like the opening title card says Exclusive Films Presents, and Exclusive was the distribution arm of Hammer, not Arm and Hammer, but arm of Hammer.
Yeah.
And so there's been a little bit of confusion as to what's Hammer, what's Exclusive, because they're a little interchangeable at the beginning of their incarnation. Later, as Hammer became more successful, places like Seven Arts and Warner Brothers and Universal, they all were the ones who were going to distribute it worldwide. And so Exclusive kind of faded into the background. But for this one, Exclusive and Hammer are kind of synonymous.
Wow. I love not only talking about these movies with you, but getting the history lesson, because I feel like I'm getting this great tapestry of the whole history of this studio, and it's really wonderful. Before we go, I do want to mention the establishing shot of the crashed rocket, which I mentioned, but I didn't talk about how impressive that matte painting or whatever it was with the combination of like I guess the projection, because when you first see the rocket crash, it doesn't look that impressive, but then when you see it with other people like the fire department and everything kind of rushing up to it, you realize how big this thing was.
Right.
And I was immediately reminded of the shot of the derelict ship the first time they see that in Alien.
Yeah.
It's got like, you could put those side by side or even overlap one another. It's got that sense of creepiness and awe because of the sheer size.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up, because for me, it's kind of the thing that I love about 50s sci-fi is that there's a sense of this isn't necessarily realistic, but it's awesome. Like it really has its own quality to it. I kind of speak about that the same way when I talk about Ray Harryhausen's work. It's never like you're actually fooled into thinking, oh, this is a real thing. But what you are is going, wow, that like really sets an atmosphere all by itself. Just seeing that huge matte painting, and then the model that they build in so that you can cut into the space, the door in the spaceship. It's like all of that kind of like working together is just that's the magic for me of fantasy films. And there's in some ways like the kind of the photorealism that we've come into with the CGI age. There's a little bit of I lose a little bit there. It's because I can't really tell what's real or what's in effect. And I go, oh, it's, I don't get the sense of the behind the scenes magic that's happening, the theatricality of it.
Well, part of that is the art of the limitation, because
yes,
nowadays,
right.
Not to say that it's easy to create, all the stuff you see in Marvel movies, because it is
right.
fantastic.
I couldn't do it.
Well, right. But it's like you have a director or studio exec saying, I want to see an alien world with 100% CGI cast and make it look as real as possible. They're like, done, give us a year and a half.
Right.
Whereas this, in 1955, like, we're going to have a gigantic spaceship that's crashed in a farm that is twice the size of the farm. We have people coming out of it. We're going to run fire hoses to, flush out the hot air. Like, how the hell do we make that happen? You have to get inventive and creative with your shots and your modeling and your composite, that version of compositing. You can really tell that they had to kind of struggle to figure it out. And the fact that they pull it off it's a miracle.
Well, circling back to, I love that scene, that opening scene, because there's just so much happens in there. And I love Don Levy as Quatermass there, because he's like, 1 second, he's like, we absolutely can't open the door. We can't be done. It can't, they'll incinerate. And then like 2 seconds later, he's like, we have to open that door. We have to get them out of there. Like, it doesn't matter. We just have to try. So focus all your fire hoses on right around the door. And I'm like, I love this guy, because it's like, he has the absolute confidence to just reverse his opinion, and just be like, no, what I say now is what matters. It's not what I said before. And there's something very, admirable about that, where it's like, but you just said, it's like, never mind what I just said. Do what I'm saying now.
I want to correct you, though. It's what he says now that matters. Anyhow, but no, yeah. And then last point, I swear, then I'll let you go. There was a certain poetry, as George Lucas might refer to it, a rhyming from the beginning set piece to the end set piece that I thought was like really clever. In the beginning, they're running all these hoses. It's a big elaborate production to flush out the thing, to open up the spaceship with water so they don't incinerate everybody inside. And at the end, they're running all like electrical cables feeding all of the electricity of London into Westminster Abbey to blow up the monster.
Yeah, I was like, really? We need all of the electricity? You need everything. You can't just, okay, all right.
There's so much as an icebox light that's left on.
That's right. You could ruin it for everybody. You selfish people.
Well, I appreciate your generosity in recommending that we talk about this movie and going on this journey with me. I am looking forward. Are we talking about Quatermass in the Pit next month? Is that what we have on?
No, actually, we're going to do Quatermass. We're going chronological order, so we won't get to Quatermass in the Pit for a little while. However, if you choose to do some homework, you can watch Quatermass 2, which came out the following year, 1956.
Okay.
Because it's wonderful, and I think you'll really enjoy it, especially if you enjoyed this one.
All right. Well, I have clearly forgotten my own calendar. So do you remember what we're talking about next month?
I don't remember, but look, there's this great thing called the internet. And let me just zip. And still zipping. Here we go. All right. So what are we doing in March for March Madness? I think we're doing The Mummy. We're doing Mummy Madness.
All right. And
1959, starring Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee once again.
Oh, that, I love the idea of doing Son of Hammerland, but I also love the fact that we're not getting away from Christopher Lee and
no, they'll be showing up several times throughout 2022.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much again, sir. Aaron Christensen of Horror 101 with Dr. AC. Folks, check out his stuff. There'll be links down in the description below, as well as a link to his review of the Quatermass Experiment. I said it right at the end of the show.
Correct.
Yay.
No shots for you.
Yeah, well, yeah, I need some better booze. I got to crack open that J&B that's behind me, but we'll do that tomorrow.
Do that on Saturday. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, thank you again, sir. Folks out there, if you liked this stuff, this show, like and subscribe and come back for next month as we return with Son of Hammerland, The Mummy. Take care, sir.
You bet.